Hello students, welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. Today, as a part of our MBA first year second semester program, we are going to look at the subject Operations Management, in which we will cover the unit 2, that is concepts of productivity. Now, before we get into the productivity, let's try to understand a few terms related to the productivity. All of you know by this time that operations management is all about the conversion of inputs to the outputs. So, in this context, productivity is mainly concerned with the efficient utilization of resources, that is the inputs, in order to produce the goods and or services. Production is mainly concerned with the activity of producing goods or services. Whereas, when you look at the term called as efficiency, efficiency is concerned with the actual output obtained to the standard output expected. Whereas, effectiveness is mainly the degree of accomplishment of objectives. In other words, we can say how well output or result is accomplished. Now, let us come on to the discussion related to the productivity. To start with, let us understand the meaning of productivity in terms of its definition. International Labour Organization, that is ILO, defines productivity as the ratio between output of a work and the input of resources used in the process of creating the wealth. This definition applies to enterprises, industries, or you can even apply this definition to the economy as a whole. Productivity could be understood as simply the ratio between the amount of a product and amount of resources used in the course of production. So, let us start with the definition of productivity. International Labour Organization, it defines productivity as the ratio between the output of a work and the input of the resources, which are used in the process of creating the wealth. Now, when we are talking about the resources can be land, material, plant, machinery, people, as well as capital. Now, when we are talking about productivity, especially in the context of engineering, we need to understand that it is an engineering first approach focused on optimizing the developer workflows to deliver high quality software more efficiently and foster a positive developer experience. Remember, this basically pertains to the usage of productivity in the context of the software development. Now, when we are discussing about productivity, it also makes sense to understand the key elements in order to improve the productivity. Now, if I need to get the productivity right, I need to obtain the upper management support. So, especially top management support is very much important if we need to achieve the productivity. We should also create new organizational components. If the old organizational components are not working, we need to start looking at creating new organizational components. At the same time, we should have open communication in the organization. Open communication basically means that when we are talking about the flow of the communication, not only that the communication has to flow from top to the bottom, but at the same time the communication should flow from bottom to top also. This would basically ensure that there is clear cut communication across the organization, and we should also ensure that employees are completely involved. Without the involvement of employees, it becomes quite difficult to achieve the productivity. Now, we should also look in terms of how to measure and how to analyze the productivity. Let us look at certain measures that are related to the productivity. So, if I am talking about productivity only from the perspective of the labor productivity is understood as the total output that is created divided by the labor input. You need to understand here that even though we are considering the total output in the numerator, in the denominator we are looking at only the labor input. That is the reason why we are talking about the labor productivity. So, if I am talking about labor productivity in terms of the number of hours, it should be equal to the total quantity produced divided by the actual man hours required to produce that particular quantity. Labor productivity in terms of money also could be expressed. What we can do is, we can look at the numerator in terms of the total cost or the sales value related to the output that is produced, and then we can divide it by the amount in terms of rupees spent on worker. So, this is an interesting perspective where when we are talking about labor productivity, from the perspective of money, we are looking at both the numerator as well as the denominator in terms of the measure in terms of the money. It could be dollars, it could be rupees, but at the end of the day, we need to understand that both the numerator as well as denominator are expressed in terms of money terms. The productivity of labor can be increased by increasing the efficiency of the labor and also reducing the labor time. That means, if the labor can produce more output in a given amount of time, then automatically the labor productivity is going to get increased. Further continuing with the measures of productivity, Let's start looking at the other two methods which are related to the first one known as the material productivity and the second one known as the machine productivity. So, when we are talking about machine productivity, it is nothing but the total output divided by the material input. That means we need to understand the productivity in terms of looking at the number of units produced divided by the total material cost. Again, remember here when we are talking about the scenario. So, when we are talking about this particular scenario related to productivity, we should understand that material productivity is nothing but when the number of units produced are divided by the total material cost, we call it as material productivity. At the same time, when we are talking about the machine productivity, we should understand that it is nothing but the output in the standard hours divided by the actual machine hours. That means, the number of machine hours which you have actually worked on in order to produce the output. And finally, when we start talking in terms of the money, we talk about what is known as capital productivity. So, when we are talking about capital productivity, it is equal to the total output divided by the capital employed, which is nothing but the total output divided by the capital input. That means, always you should understand that whenever we are talking about productivity, productivity is expressed in terms of the output to the input. Only thing is, when we are looking at productivity in terms of labor, the denominator goes into the number of man hours. When we are talking about the material productivity, it goes in terms of the total material cost. When we are talking about the machine productivity, it goes in terms of the actual machine hours. When we are talking about the capital productivity, it goes in terms of the input of the capital. So far, what we have seen are only partial measures of productivity. When we are talking about multi-factor productivity, the discussion about productivity takes a different kind of a turn, because when we are talking about multi-factor productivity, this measure utilizes more than a single factor. Remember, in the earlier cases, when we are talking about the denominator, we are talking about either in terms of the labor hours or in terms of the machine hours or in terms of the material cost. But in this case, we are looking at measuring productivity by looking at more than a single factor. For example, both labor and capital. So, here in the denominator, we could be having both labor as well as the capital. That means, output divided by the units in terms of both labor as well as the capital. Hence, multi-factor productivity is the ratio of the total output to a subset of the inputs. A subset of inputs might consist only labor and materials, or it could include capital also. That means, whenever we are talking about the input, input could be in terms of the labor, input could be in terms of the money, input could be in terms of the number of hours of the machines that are used. So, we are basically using the subset of this when we are calculating the denominator. Now, let us look at the term called as total productivity. Total factor productivity. So, again here total productivity, the other way of looking at it is calling it as total factor productivity. It is measured by combining the effects of all the resources used in the production of goods and services. So, you should understand that when we are talking about total factor productivity, we are looking at combining the effects of all the resources which are used in the production of the goods or services. So, interestingly, when we are talking about the total goods and services, inputs required by the total goods and services, these could include labor, capital, raw material, energy and anything else. So, we are basically looking at this as a part of the denominator. Earlier we were using either a subset of these inputs, or earlier we were looking at only one of the inputs in terms of the denominator. But in this particular case, we are looking at combining all the inputs that are there in order to produce the output. The total output could be expressed in the same unit of the measure, and the total input should also be expressed in the same unit of the measure. That means, here both the numerator as well as the denominator are expressed in the same units. So, how do you do it? Resources are often converted to rupees, or maybe in the context of a Western environment, it could be converted in terms of the dollars, or standard hours. That means, you can convert it in terms of the money, or you can convert it into in terms of the number of hours, so that a single figure can be used as an aggregate measure of the total input or the output. So, the single measure is used both for the numerator as well as the denominator. So, you are going to get a ratio here. However, when we are talking about the total output and total input, they may not be expressed in the same unit of measure. You can also express them in different units of measurement, but generally it is better if you could express them in the same units of measurement. For example, total output could be expressed as the number of units produced, and the total input could be expressed in terms of the rupees. such as tons of steels produced per rupee input. So, quite interestingly here, when we are looking at the output, say output is measured in terms of the tons of steel that is produced. If you are taking a steel industry, you are taking a steel company into consideration, tons of steel that is used, right, that is actually manufactured, divided by the rupee input. That means how much of money you have spent in terms of producing this. So, the output is in terms of the tons of steel produced, and the denominator, that is the input, is in terms of the money that is used in order to produce this amount of steel. Let us take a few examples in terms of the calculation of productivity. So, if you can look at your screen, there is certain data that is available to you. So, this data is related to a manufacturing company. So, we are looking at the data as follows. The output per shift of 8 hours. Generally, if you are talking about a shift in the context of a factory, you are going to have 8-hour shifts, 8 into 3, 24, 3 shifts per day, right. So, output per shift of 8 hours, if it is around 1000 pieces, and the sales price of each item is around rupees 10 per piece, and the labor charges are rupees 250 per hour, and materials required are 50 kgs at the rate of 100 per kg. Now, you can easily understand that when you are talking about 50 kgs of material, you can convert this into the amount of money, because it is 100 rupees per kg the material cost is. So, 50 into 100, that will give you the calculation in terms of the money that is spent in terms of the material. Similarly, the capital inputs are 1000 rupees, energy inputs are 2000 rupees. Of course, using this, can we calculate certain productivity indices? Now, we are going to do that. Carefully follow the next steps. So, here when we are talking about the solution, first let us calculate the output. Now, what is the output here? Definitely output could be in terms of whatever the product output or the service output that is produced. But what we can do is, if you can look at the sales revenue of this output, it could be expressed in terms of money. So, here if I am looking at producing 1000 pieces and I am selling them at the rate of 10 rupees each, right, my sales revenue, that is the output for me, is 10,000 rupees, because 1000 pieces multiplied by 10 rupees, that gives me 10,000 rupees. Similarly, I am talking about labor charges of 250 rupees, 250 per hour. So, multiply it with 8, and then you are going to get 2000 rupees as the labor charges. Similarly, when you are talking about the material input, 50 kgs of material is used per kg, it is rupees 100 per kg, therefore, the material input is 5000 rupees. Now, already we are given the capital input in terms of 1000 rupees, we are given energy inputs in terms of 2000 rupees. Now, let us look at the calculation of what is called as the net output. Now, the formula for net output is the total output minus the materials and services produced. Please follow this very clearly. Net output, we are not talking about the gross output, we are talking about the net output. So, when you are talking about the net output is equal to the total output whatever we have got minus, that means you need to subtract the materials and services purchased. That means, what is the total money that you are getting, and from that you subtract the money you have spent on materials as well as the money you have spent on services. So, if you look at the problem very clearly, we are given that the amount of money that is spent for materials is 5000 rupees. The amount of money that is spent on labor charges, because labor basically they are going to give you the service, that money equals to 2000 rupees. So, 10,000 minus of this 5000 plus of 2000, that comes to 10,000 minus 7,000. So, your net output is 10,000 minus 7,000, that is equal to rupees 3,000. Now, when we are talking about labor productivity, simply look at the total output. So, when I am talking about the total output here, what is that I am doing? My total output is 10,000 rupees. My labor input, what is the cost of my labor? You can look at the second line. In the second line, we are given that the cost of the labor is 2000 rupees. So, 10,000 divided by 2000, that means labor productivity is equal to 5, right. You are getting a figure. You can compare these figures across the years. Is my labor productivity increasing or decreasing? Is it staying constant? What can I do in order to increase the labor productivity? These issues can be discussed only when you are able to measure the productivity. Similarly, when you are talking about the capital productivity, you can see very clearly that your 10,000 divided by 1000 is equal to 10. So, capital productivity is 10. Similarly, when you are talking about materials productivity, the total output is 10,000 rupees. my material input, you can find that the material input cost is 5,000 rupees. So, 10,000 divided by 5,000 is equal to 2. Therefore, your material productivity is equal to 2. Now, let us look at the energy productivity. So, by this time you would have easily understood that we are going to calculate the total output divided by the cost of energy. So, what is the energy input here? If you carefully go back to the problem, you will find that it is around 2,000 rupees. So, my total output is 10,000. 10,000 divided by 2,000, that gives me a value of 5. Similarly, earlier if you see, we have calculated something called as total factor productivity. Okay? Let me just take you to the previous slide where we have calculated the total factor productivity. Now, we are going to look at the calculation of energy productivity. By this time, you would have understood that energy productivity is nothing but the total output divided by the amount of money spent on energy. Therefore, total output is 10,000 rupees divided by my energy input is 2,000 rupees. That gives me a value of 5. And if you closely remember, in the previous discussion, we were talking about total factor productivity, where we calculated the net output. Net output is nothing but the total output that you are getting minus of whatever the service cost that is there, as well as the material cost, right. So, in the earlier slide, we looked at subtracting 10,000 minus of 7,000. Therefore, our net output is 3,000. Now, 3,000 divided by labor input plus capital input, that gives me 3,000 divided by 3,000, which is equal to 1. Now, coming to the total productivity, as you have already seen, total productivity is nothing but the total output divided by the labor cost, material cost, capital cost and energy cost. This is the total input that comes in the denominator. So, in this case, if you really look at dividing the total output with labor, material, capitals and energy input, we get 10,000 divided by 2,000 plus 5,000 plus 1,000 plus 2,000, which is equal to 10,000 by 10,000. That gives us a number 1. That means, your total productivity is equal to 1. Now, let us look at a second example, which is slightly different from the previous example. A manufacturing company is operating with full efficiency. So, calculate various productivity indices. So, if you look at the particulars that are given in this particular problem, you can look at the table where we are given the data related to the sales, labor, raw materials and capital equipment. So, you can very clearly see that here we are given the quantity in terms of the number of units. You can see that sales is in terms of the number of units. You can also see that labor is in terms of the number of hours, raw material is in terms of the amount of money, that is rupees, and then capital equipment is also in terms of the number of hours you have used the capital equipment. Now, the solution is quite interesting here, because when we are talking about going with a solution for this kind of a problem, you just carefully look in terms of what is the total output that is there. So, total output very clearly here you can see it is 1 lakh, right. 1 lakh in terms of the numbers, that is the total number of units that were produced. Now, at the same time, when you are talking about the labor input, please see in the table, the second one is the labor. Labor input is 20,000 hours. So, here what is happening is your total output is 1 lakh units divided by 20,000 hours. That means, basically you are producing 5 units per hour, because per labor hour. To be more precise, it is 5 units per labor hour. Similarly, when you are talking about the capital productivity, total output by capital input, because we are looking at only the capital part of it. So, it is equal to 1 lakh units divided by 60,000, that comes to 1.67. Similarly, materials productivity is equal to total output divided by the material input, which is equal to 1 lakh divided by 20,000, that comes to 5. Now, when we are talking about the total productivity, like in the earlier problem, we have seen the total output being divided by the labor plus capital plus materials input. So, in this case, it is 1 lakh units divided by 20,000 plus 60,000 plus 20,000, which is equal to 1. So, these are the two examples that we have seen pertaining to the calculation of productivity. Now, what are the factors that influence the industrial productivity? Primary factors are the effort and working capital of an individual, not working capital, it is the working capacity of an individual. So, the primary factor is whether individuals are able to put the effort and whether individuals have got the capacity to work. Now, organization factors also are there. They are related to the design and transformation process required to produce some of the items, right. Similarly, when we are talking about the other factors, the conventions and traditions in the organization, say for example, the activities of the labor unions, the medical facilities, right, the understanding between the top management as well as the other levels of management, these will also have a role in terms of deciding the industrial productivity. The second category of items when we are talking about the productivity are related to output, that is the research and development techniques that are there, the improvement in the technology and efficient sales strategy of the organization. At the same time, you should also look at the efficient use of input resources. So, better control of the stores where the material is present, production and control policy, maintenance of machines, etc. This is going to minimize the production cost. If the production cost is minimized, automatically the productivity is going to get increased. What are the factors that influence the industrial productivity? If I continue the discussion, the factors listed in the category 1 and 2 already what we have discussed can be further divided into 4 major classes. One is the technological factors, the second one is the labor factors, the third one is the managerial factors and the fourth one is the external factors. So, the first one is broadly related to the developments in the technology, the kind of technology, the tools, what kind of materials are being used, this is going to have an impact on the productivity. Similarly, the second part is related to the labor factors, the skill of the labor, right, the health and attitude of the labor towards the work, towards the management, what kind of training they are getting, this is going to have an impact. Similarly, when we are talking about the managerial factors, organization structure, scheduling of work, financial management, layout of the plant, the policies related to the management of workers, all these are going to have an impact on the productivity. But apart from these, you could also have certain external factors like say power facility, the availability of electricity, transport facilities, what are the kinds of taxes and tariffs which are levied on whatever you are producing. These will also have an important what you call impact. These are going to impact the productivity. How can we improve the productivity? That is a very interesting question. When we are trying to improve the productivity, we are trying to look at going with improvement in terms of the machines as well as automation. Can I use advanced machinery which could help me in terms of improving the productivity, right? Effective management as well as the planning. Can I have a better way of managing? Can I have a better way of planning my production? Can I improve process using the management information systems so that there is no communication gap among the various levels of management as well as the workers? Can I design the job better? That is where we are talking about the job design, right? Can I improve the working environment? Can I give them better training? So, if you are able to do a better job in terms of the job design, if you are able to create a better working environment, if you are able to give better training to the workers, automatically your productivity is bound to increase. At the same time, if you look at the developments in terms of the production like let us say the application of total quality management, business process re-engineering, right, just in time. These are some of the techniques which are very popular across the world and which some of the Indian companies are also using, which will help us in terms of improving the productivity. What is the importance of productivity? The first and foremost thing is not only from the firm's perspective, but even from a country's perspective, productivity is a key to prosperity. If a nation has to become wealthy, productivity of the nation is very much important. Higher productivity leads to economic growth as well as social progress. So, when we are talking about the progress of a society, when you are talking about the development of an economy, a better productivity is bound to have a positive impact on these two things. Higher productivity requires elimination of waste in all forms. Say for example, if I am supposed to increase the productivity, very clearly I need to see that I get a better output using the input. So, in this particular case, automatically my focus would be in terms of how to reduce the wastage. So, that if I can reduce the wastage, the amount of material or the amount of time which is going as a waste, if I can reduce that, the productivity is going to increase. Similarly, improvement in productivity can minimize the level of poverty as well as unemployment. If you have a better productivity, people will find good jobs, they are able to produce more, the consumption is more opportunities for employment are there. At the same time, if there is better employment, automatically there is a reduction in the level of the poverty. There is also one more concept called as incremental capital output ratio, which we call it as ICAR. Now, what is this particular metric? What is this particular measurement? This marginal amount of investment, that means the marginal amount of investment capital necessary for an entity to generate in the next unit of production. Say for example, if you are looking at producing an extra unit, what is the marginal amount of investment capital which is necessary? That is related to incremental capital output ratio. Overall, a higher ICAR value is not preferred because it indicates that the entity's production is inefficient. That means, incrementally speaking, you should be able to produce an extra unit by relatively using lesser amount of inputs. That means, at a lesser cost, at a lesser price, you are able to produce a unit. Therefore, for betterment of the productivity, overall higher ICAR value is not preferred, rather we will go with a lower ICAR value. ICAR value is calculated as the annual investment divided by the annual increase in the GDP. As all of you know, GDP is nothing but the gross domestic product. So, ICAR is calculated as an annual investment or an annual increase in the GDP. Now, if you are talking about an example, you can see this on your slide. You can find that if a particular country has an ICAR of 5, then this means that maybe if in the case of India it could be 5 rupees, maybe in the case of a western country it could be $5. So, if it is 5, it means that 5 rupees worth of capital investment is needed to create 1 rupee worth of extra production. Please see this, 5 rupees of capital investment is required to create a 1 rupee worth of extra production. So, however, if the country had a score of 10 in the previous year, that means earlier to produce something of value of 1 rupee, you are going with spending 10 rupees. Today, to produce the same 1 rupee of output, you are spending only 5 rupees. That means that a movement of the ICAR from 10 to 5 actually indicates that the country has increased its production efficiency. Let us spend a minute on labor productivity index. The term labor productivity is generally defined as the ratio of physical amount of output achieved in a given period to the corresponding amount of the labor expended. That means, how much of the labor you have actually used. The output per man hours or man hour, that means you can calculate the output with respect to the man years or man hours. It is related to the time, the amount of time someone works, right. And the input per man years or per man hour, this could be treated as the labor productivity index. To summarize our discussion for today, we started with understanding what is productivity. We have looked at how productivity has been defined by International Labour Organization also. So, at a very broader level, when you are talking about productivity, productivity is the ratio of the output to the input. Productivity is the ratio of the output to the input. At the same time, we have also seen that there are quite a few factors that are going to have an impact on productivity. There are internal factors as well as external factors. We have seen that these factors could range from anywhere from the skills of the labor, the attitude of the labor, the kind of training that is given to the labor, maybe the production technologies that are used, the kind of machinery that is used in the production, to some of the external factors like the kind of tariffs, the kind of taxes that a particular country is going to have on the products that are produced. So, there are many factors that are going to have an impact on the productivity. Now, this is measured when we are talking about the productivity measurement. In fact, we have seen a couple of problems where we have taken certain data and then we try to calculate the productivity values. So, the productivity can be measured via partially or using the total factors or total productivity. Now, you have seen this very clearly where when we are looking at productivity, we said that productivity could be measured in terms of looking at the partial inputs. You can use only the labor or you can use only the man hours, right, like that you are going to do, or you can look at the total productivity also where you are looking at the total output divided by the total input. Now, finally, when we are talking about the productivity, we try to look in terms of what could be done in order to improve the productivity. We have seen that productivity could be improved using the technology, management as well as people. So, this is the lesson we have learned today, which is related to understanding the concept of productivity, the measurement of productivity, understanding the factors affecting productivity, as well as how to improve the productivity, how a country can improve the productivity by basically making changes in terms of how the production technologies are used, how the people are trained, especially in the context of people who are working in either the manufacturing or in the services. Thank you.